This episode is presented in partnership with the Greater Tygerberg Partnership. Visit them at gtp.org.za. Abdullahi Ali Hassan is my guest today on Future Cities Africa. He holds a master's in urban studies and is very active in the Bellville Somalian community. We'll be discussing the economic and social benefits of multiculturalism in cities. But before we get into that, Abdullahi, welcome. Please offer a bit of background about yourself and how long have you been in Bellville?
To begin with, my name is Abdullahi Ali Hassan, and I was born and grew up in Somalia, the capital city of Somalia, Mogadishu. And I moved to South Africa in 2004, especially to Cape Town, here in Bellville. I studied here in South Africa. I work it here in South Africa. I'm still studying and working here. I have a diverse academic background or interdisciplinary background. My undergraduate was political science and development studies at University of South Africa, UNISA. I did that program from 2012 to 2016. And then in 2017, I joined UWC for an honors degree in political science. And then in 2018, I enrolled for an urban studies program at UCT, University of Cape Town, of which I finished it in 2019. And this year, 2021, I then also enrolled for a PhD program at the Graduate School of Business at UCT itself. And my current research for the PhD is about transnational immigrant entrepreneurship, which is about how immigrants who are working in South Africa and originally from other parts of Africa build values and how they do trade activities between South Africa and the countries that they came from.
How important is multiculturalism in urban centers?
I would think that for urbanization and cities in particular, diversity is a very important factor. And when you think about important global cities like New York and London and Dubai, you will see that some of them, like Dubai, for instance, 85% of residents are not from that country, United Arab Emirates itself. They are from overseas. And for New York, 37%, they said, or 38%. London also 37% are foreign-born residents of those cities. Building on that, you can see that multiculturalism and being a tangible urban space as somewhere somehow related to each other. And then coming back also to our context here in South Africa, which is already a multicultural society, of which maybe arguably, that's why it is relatively economically or politically even much better than our other African states in terms of liberal ways of thinking, in terms of the constitution and peaceful coexistence. When we think about what happened in 1994 after democracy. And of course, yes, you have these issues that emerge all the time, like whether you think about issues that has happened recently in Durban and so on, and Gauteng. But I can still believe that South Africa is way better, and diversity, I would say, is one of the main things that help it. The current debates in African context is inter-African trade, is about regional integration and so on and so forth. And South Africa being a leader in the region in Africa, cities have a role to represent that country in that context. And you can see Cape Town here when you think about how our local authorities try to showcase Cape Town as the kind of a melting pot of Africa, as the African city, and so on and so forth. So in that context, the other Africans from other parts of Africa who are here in South Africa will help that showcasing of South Africa, and in Cape Town especially, as a melting pot, as a Pan-African city, as the face of Africa, and so on and so forth, which means in the way in which the other Africans in South Africa can then embolden that diversity which existed here in South Africa is, for instance, the infusion of values and culture, like people who are from the Horn of Africa, like myself, and from Northern Africa, from Western Africa, when they are here. So South Africa is actually can become, if we use it, if you use this mechanism in a proper way, can become a true reflection of that Pan-African thing, which has got, for me, like multiple positive aspects.
What are the major challenges for multiculturalism in urban centers to be successful and efficient? And how can these challenges be addressed?
There are always challenges to make multiculturalism work, but with a political will of the elites, the political elites especially, and maybe also the economic elites, those with the leadership roles in the particular society, I think can do something about it. And if we think about, let's say, for instance, go back to the examples that I mentioned when we started. In the United States, for instance, we tend to blame the Western countries for many things, many problems that exist in our world, some of them logic, like colonialism and economic exploitation, which is still ongoing, all that. But if you think about how they deal with issues on the integration in the context of immigrants, of course, yes, they have a lot of challenges, but the issue of giving leadership roles to immigrants, I think that's very, very vital. And that is, they are doing better than we are doing here. Because think about example of American senators like Ilhan Omar, who was elected from Minnesota, Minneapolis. She's a Somali origin. Like myself, she maybe went there in 2002 or 3 or 4 when I came here. But can you ever think of an immigrant from other parts of Africa who came to South Africa can have a role like that in this country? It is possible that a person who came to South Africa in 2004 and 3, or even 2, who was a refugee, is still a refugee, whose socioeconomic rights, access to socioeconomic rights is very limited, right? Of course, we need to also realize that South Africa is an emerging market, is a developing, so-called developing country, which has its own socioeconomic problems of inequality, of all challenges, right? But it's not, we don't need to be sitting with only the negativities, right? There are many things that can be done, especially here in Cape Town. We're appreciating the contributions of all residents in the city and allowing all communities, all individuals in the city to play a role in all types of leadership, allow them to have access to basic human rights of services, all across of race, of faith, of cultural background, and all that.
What are the most significant benefits of a multicultural community?
A human being, when they are born, they are biologically born. So the person, they said, according to the sociologists, like Pierre Bourdieu, French sociologist, they said there's something called habitus. So the person, the habitat is what goes into the person and what comes out after that in a generative manner, right? So in that context, they talk about how the person is made. So let's say a person who was born in a particular city, and that particular city is homogeneous, like my city where I came from, like Mogadishu, right? The majority or all of them were Somalis when I grew up. That person maybe speaks one language, maybe knows only one culture and all that and so on and so forth. And another person has a diversity like Cape Town or whatever, or Nigeria, Lagos, or maybe Cairo in our African context. And then you engage different cultures, different peoples with different values. So that person who lives in a city of diversity will have a habitat of everything, of rich, diverse values and being, right? So and in that also context, I want to go back to a concept that was coined by one of Africa's best scholars, whose name was Ali Mazrui, which was actually a documentary that he made in 1980s that I would actually suggest that our young people of this generation must watch, because it is available online, called it the Africanist, the Triple Heritage, right? Which means the African person has got three heritages in him, built in him or her, which means the person is informed by three sources of cultures, which is the one that you are born with your ethnicity. In Africa, we have different ethnicities that comes with the language and ways of seeing the world. Then you have Islam in Africa is very popular on almost all regions. And then you have the Western education, which also comes with Christianity, right? So it's embedded in the education itself. So any person of Africa, especially those who live in the urban areas and cities, three cultures inform them in the ways they think, they do things, all that. So in that context, people, when they moved in through different parts of Africa, they either have the three, or at least one of them, and complemented the other one. Like let's take the example of South Africa. South Africa has got two dominant ones, which was the indigenous and the Western, and Christianity. But then you have immigrants who are coming from Northern Africa, coming from Western Africa, coming from where I came from, Horn of Africa. They come with values that are indigenous there, but infused with what we call Eastern traditions, mainly Islam and Arab culture and all that, right? Embedded in their cultures. He also, Ali calls that kind of thing Afrabi, which is like African, Arabia, infused to each other. So when you have those types of communities together here in Cape Town, I think that the Cape Townians, the traditional Cape Townians are then infused with these new values that are coming to them. So the result is that a person who is cosmopolitan, Pan-African will emerge. They come with an economic benefit because values can be translated into economic activity, right? So if you think about immigrant entrepreneurship, for instance, and how they network and how they make things happen. For instance, in my thesis for the urban studies, when I look at the immigrant entrepreneurship in Cape Town and what was their role in the economy of the city, I got, they can actually be seen what one sociologist, Edna Bonasik, called it the middleman minority, which means people who connect the producer to the consumer. If you come to Bellville here, you will find that so many immigrants are running cash and carries and so on and so forth, right? So those cash and carries sell local goods and products. Cash and carries do not often import stuff to South Africa. What they sell is locally made and locally consumed. So they get it from the producer, supplier, who's local South African companies. And then they distribute through the township economy to the consumer, being the last person. So in that context, they are some sort of an infrastructure, right? One can then think about how they bring goods and services closer to the communities where they work in the township communities, for instance. You might remember that in under apartheid, infrastructure was a very scarce resource. All the important facilities were away. People used to travel for a loaf of bread. Malls and business shops were always outside. I'm talking about the majority of the South Africans at that time, right? The Black communities. Unfortunately, we still have some sort of the sameness, right? We still, the economy is still formed in the kind of somewhere, somehow, it's still the same. So if you take the example of the Espasa shops, for instance, they are closer to the communities in which they work. When the owner goes to Macro, for instance, and he buys from them, or he goes to other cash and carries like here in Bellville, he takes the goods to where he's basically, let's say, Kalisha, older, a senior citizen in that area, whose life might depend on pension, very minimum amount of money from the state, will be able to reach the services, which is groceries and so on and so forth. Another thing also, because the immigrants, they come to any place that they go to with networks, right? With knowledge, right? With geographies. So through that, they also create an opportunity, right? So in the South African context now, what is happening is that because South Africa is also a relatively superior manufacturer, right? We produce something here. We're not to the level that we want to be, right? But we still produce. And the countries in the region, in the African continent, need our products. So the immigrants that are here, especially those that are business people, those who came when I came, for instance, and started businesses, started from informality to smaller shops and so on and so forth. Today, they are here to understand the opportunity existing between South Africa and where they came from. So what they are doing is that they are trading. They are taking the South African products to where they came from. So in a sense, they are doing the work of the so-called inter-African trade, which is championed by the African Union, by the way. But unfortunately, our institutions do not see that. The benefits of having immigrants is actually visible and helpful, but it always depends on how we leverage on that. And I still go back and emphasize the role of the elites, political elites and the economic elites. Are we using immigrants as a scapegoat and blame them for our shortcomings? Or are we appreciating and managing? Because if you manage immigration, you benefit from it. South Africa is not the first country that received immigrants. Immigration was part and parcel of life of human being ever, right, from the beginning. And it will be ever to the end. So we need to be realistic and manage immigration and benefit from it.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the cultural environment in Bellville specifically?
Bellville is a very diverse space of our city here in Cape Town. We have so many different nations, from not only from Africa, but also outside of Africa. And one of the places that I work here in the CBD here, I have neighbors from all over. I have a neighbor and a businesswoman from Ghana. another one from Ethiopia, from South Africa, of course, and myself from the Horn of Africa, and Malawi. What happened the other day was that, for instance, one of them was playing a music, and the other one is playing also another music, and then another one also, and so on. And I thought about it. And another one is cooking, and you feel the smell coming from the kitchen, and so on and so forth. So I said, the actual African Union headquarters is this one, like the building, that we have here. So because of that richness and culture, I think that the people are actually embracing each other. I want to say that because we tend to exaggerate negativities. And I build on that I do not hear any community kind of rift or problems or no. Of course, this common problem of security and so on and so forth exists in the country, right? And for immigrants, maybe it might be a little bit more, can be more to them, especially those who are in business, but that we leave it there. In the past, I remember that there was some sort of misunderstandings between the local and the immigrants in terms of culture. So what was that misunderstanding? Some of the immigrants in Bellville are, of course, Muslims. They belong to the Islamic faith. And for the Islamic faith, a mosque is a part of the important things for the community. So there is a mosque here. And of course, the mosque is new in this part of Cape Town, because you remember this part of Cape Town, Bellville, originally were traditional communities that we know, Afrikaans-speaking communities here. There was no, of course, immigrant community here before 1984. But then after 1984, when they came with this also culture and traditions. So in the mosque, there is something called adhan, which means 5 times a day, the imam will call the people to come to the mosque, right? So it has got a microphone. So some neighborhoods said, okay, there's a sound coming from the mosque, from somewhere, a building here. What is it? What are these people doing? So they complained. So I remember that the local NGO, an immigrant-run NGO, we had to organize a workshop between people of the mosque and the local communities, bring them together and facilitate that platform where they ask questions like, okay, what is this? What do you do and why do you do? What does it mean? I remember one of them, they ask each other, what is your name? My name is Friedrich. What does it mean? What does your name mean? What is your name? My name is Muhammad. What does it mean? I remember. So it was, I think, successful. And after that, I did not hear anything of cultural misunderstanding. But then I also want to mention that it is a challenge. When you have diverse communities in cities, there's always kind of a separation, like, okay, it can come in the form of race, it can come in the form of economic class, and so on and so forth. Here in Cape Town, gated communities, township communities, you don't come here, why do you go there, and so on and so forth. But anything that I would mention here as a kind of cultural misunderstanding, I think it's not that significant.
How have the Somalian community been able to integrate into Bellville, and what has been some of the challenges and successes?
In the South African context, the community, the demographics here were the so-called, let me say, European descent communities were this side. So the Somalis, I think that they were the first group who joined this side of Bellville. In Bellville, you have Bellville South and so on and so forth. I'm talking about Bellville CBD and the other sides, right? So if you think about that, how they embedded themselves and established here, you can consider that kind of some sort of integration, which is actually good, which helps us to think about South Africa in a new lens, right? Because communities, exist, and Bellville is diverse, right? But how did they do? Actually, I do not know how they did. But what I see is that they did. But if we try to say something about how they did, I think it is because there's something called when you think about when I think about what we read for development studies when I was undergraduate, there's something called do or die attitude, where a person has no other option unless he does something for his supplies, right? So for many immigrants that are today considered as successful business people, when they started the businesses, it did not mean like they want to be business people, but because they were excluded from the system, because they could not be considered as skilled individuals. They were not trained teachers and doctors. They had to do something for themselves in order to survive. So you start from being an informal trader in the street, and then you build there. But that takes you to somewhere. So I think that do and die attitude, I think, helped a big number of immigrant entrepreneurs in South Africa, and Somalis included. Challenges are many. Immigrants, they are excluded, simple. They are excluded in the context of financial access. Majority of them are business people who cannot get loan from the bank, simple. And some of them, of course, yes. But the ones that are getting, they must prove themselves 110 times than the local counterparts, right? And then they are also, of course, they are not held by the state institutions, actually. They are actually also excluded in many ways. And they are scapegoated. So if you read if you follow the public discourse, right, the politicians will come out and say, oh yes, immigrants are taking jobs away. Or immigrants are taking over the city, right? They are taking over Bellville, right? Simple. Easy. So when that is happening, they are also doing something. It's very paradoxical, right? Where you say negative things, but also positive things are coming out from what you said they are negative. They have their own also challenges, which are, for instance, the language barrier. Many of them came from where they don't speak English. The majority of immigrants in South Africa came from the region, our region, SADC region, Zimbabwe, for instance, because the proximity, I would say, okay, maybe the other majority, if you divide the immigrants into different nations. But what is good about the Zimbabwean context is that they speak English. They not only speak English, but they also share a common culture in a way, because that proximity, right, in South Africa, right? So when they come to South Africa, they can easily integrate, or you don't see them, right? Right. So that's what's good about when you know the language and culture. But for Somali, he does not speak English, and he might not know the local culture. So it takes 10 years or over for him to understand the dynamics and adapt, unless the person already was educated or whatever. So for other communities from Northern Africa or Western Africa, I think it is the same for them also, because people from Congo, for instance, they speak French or Lingala, right? So that is also a barrier, a challenge to them. And I go back to how the Western world engages immigrants when they are new, and how we engage in the third world, especially in South Africa, is that there is no programs to help them to settle or integrate anything here. But in the West, they do. They have mechanisms where when the person is new, the person must firstly learn the language. And when they learn the language and maybe a skill, and then you send them out, especially in the Scandinavian states, right? So you actually empower the person in a way, right? And you also help the society. But here, the person comes here and you don't even maybe give them a proper documentation, right? Or at least you give them if they are refugee, right? You give them, and then you give them the, what do you call that paper that says, okay, it gives socio and economic rights in the country, legal to stay and work and study, but other things, a person must get it without any other information, right? About the geography, about the place, anything. So the challenges are many, right? But we don't blame anyone for that because there is no such mechanism existing here because of the history and of course the economic situation that the country itself is battling with.
What are the most important factors in building community cohesion in multicultural urban centers?
For communities and in a local level, what we can help them to be together, we can find through the institutions, because the communities, I think they are actually, the South African communities are very good people, honestly. And the immigrants are also good people. What I do mean is that my measurement would be how do they respond to each other when there is a, let's say, a problem or a disaster of any sort, or challenges like we had the lockdown here. There's an article, a recent article I made on how immigrant communities responded to the food insecurity during the lockdown in 2020. I mean, immigrant entrepreneurs in the township communities. What they did was that some of the business owners in the township communities, they realized that people are actually suffering, right? So they asked the question, what can we do about this? So one guy in Khadija, for instance, he said, okay, let's try something. He spoke to 12 people who are also business owners. And what they did, they created a group and they said, let's collect. They collected an amount of R1 million and they bought food for 5,000 households in the Western Cape for a month. So that is very small and very minimum, but it's very symbolic also, right? And how the communities, local communities also responded to that. So my problem is that what role do the elites play in this? The political elites and the economic elites. How do we see that? If we help communities with such initiatives, that will grow. I cannot now pinpoint which project that must come from the communities. But what I know is that communities are very rich with ideas, with energy, with capabilities. But we must not let them alone. We must not block them because it is possible that we don't allow them to actually flourish and do something for themselves. So leadership is very, very vital. The issue in South Africa, I go back to it, is a leadership issue. And it goes beyond the immigrants and migration matters. It goes to all communities. We might remember what has happened in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng in this year. That is actually a very important indication of how we need to wake up and actually do something which goes across communities and good for everyone, including the migrants.
How can city governments better support multicultural populations?
I think that the city governments have a role because communities by nature are local, and the city governments are local authorities who are supposed to be closer to communities. So I would say, like, okay, for instance, You can organize projects, programs that help communities learn from each other, programs that recognize the contributions of communities and the importance of the cultural representations. And I want to take one example, for instance. We had a what we call open street days in Cape Town. I hope we will have them again after the lockdown. And I remember that I was part of the volunteers or organizers in 2015, first one here in Bellville. So what happened was that, for instance, the activities of the day, we said any person can choose any activity that they want to do the day. Some of them will sing, some of them will do sporting activities like running, soccer, you name it. It's a lot of activities, right? So what happened was that then some of the activities, kids were playing together. Young people were playing soccer together. Some of the community members ran together. I'm a runner. I run, right? So I remember I spoke to one of the senior ladies who attended the day. She's a local person. She was born here, but she was very senior, around 70. And what she did was that she sat in the midst of the road, because for the day we closed, the roads were closed. So she sat in the street and said, okay, this is the first day I came here, like just sitting in the road like this. But also kids who have got the immigrants here in Bellville, Somalis and others, the kids, young girls who have the hijabs on and so on, playing with the others. I think it was quite a wonderful activity. And I think that symbolically, it is helpful because it helps communities learn from each other, right? But I want to emphasize that we need practical response to problems. We need to take that seriously. But the symbolic also activities, of course, will lead us to other activities, because people must engage each other first before they can do something together. Such activities might change the perceptions, the narratives, right? So the immigrants are problems, they bring crime to our communities, they take jobs away, they speak certain language we don't understand, right? In the local communities, they don't want us, and so on and so forth, right? Both narratives are exaggerated, honestly, but who should debunk those perceptions? People who have the capacity to do that, whether through leadership capacity or whether it is cultural capacity of knowledge, like you're doing, of which I should thank you and the GTP. So, yeah, and I want to actually emphasize that for immigration in general, immigration matters, migration issues, narrative is very important. So perceptions are very important. With knowledge, it's not something that you are making a favor for anyone. It's a truth, right? Migration is real. It existed ever and it will ever exist. And it does not necessarily bad, because it built whole countries, the most powerful countries in the world were built by immigrants, like the United States, right? So I just want to say that the perception, which is jump beyond it by the elites, must change the negative perception, that the failure of leadership, their leadership, is being attributed to the vulnerable parts of the society who are the immigrants.